Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Tuesday, April the 19th, 2022. Let's begin with the cry of the cry bully, the rage of the cry bully. Weak women pretending to be strong women and then bursting into tears when everything doesn't go their way, which, in other words, is contemporary journalism. I'm going to talk first about a woman called Taylor Lorenz, who likes doxing people. But there's a lot that we don't know about her. For instance, how old is she? She is she works for the Washington Post, formerly the New York Times. According to Wikipedia, she was born circa 1984 to 1987. There was an amusing meme going around on Twitter today that she is actually 49 years old. Not that there's anything wrong with being 49 years old, of course, but she is a warrior. She is a warrior for truth and against disinformation, particularly an outrageous scabrous site called Libs of TikTok, which is what it does is it takes screen captures of things that have been put up on TikTok or on Twitter, basically, liberals making themselves look ridiculous and or evil. So there was much talk about this story before it landed this morning. Meet the woman behind Libs of TikTok secretly fueling the right's outrage machine. A popular Twitter account has morphed into a social media phenomenon, spreading anti-alphabet people sentiment and shaping public discourse. Oh my God. Shaping public discourse. Is it really shaping public discourse? On March the 8th, a Twitter account called Libs of TikTok posted a video of a woman teaching sex education to children in Kentucky, calling the woman in the video a predator. The next evening, the same clip was featured on Laura Ingraham's Fox News program, prompting the host to ask, when did our public schools, any schools, become what are essentially grooming centers for gender identity radicals? Well, that's not exactly what happened. As Christopher Rufo responded, the Taylor Lorenz hit piece against Libs of TikTok opens with a reference to my reporting on the sexy summer camp teachers who are not simply teaching sex education, but promoting BDSM, sex on drugs, and being a sex worker. She starts lying in the first sentence. Taylor Lorenz continued, Libs of TikTok reposts a steady stream of TikTok videos and social media posts, primarily from alphabet people, often including incendiary framing designed to generate outrage. Videos shared from the account quickly find their way to the most influential names in right-wing media. The account has emerged as a powerful force on the internet, shaping right-wing media, impacting anti-alphabet people legislation, and influencing millions by posting viral videos aimed at inciting outrage among the right. Well, there's an obvious question here, which many people have raised, is if these liberals don't want to be mocked for being outrageous, then don't post these things to TikTok. See, it only goes in one direction. When people on the left call people on the right Nazis, fascists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, Handmaid's Tale, you know the drill. Well, no, see, that's brave. But when they're criticized for their hyperbole, that is cowardly. It hurts people. It's disinformation. It's wrecking society. How many times can we print LGBTQ plus in a story? Well, Taylor Lorenz is trying to push the boundaries here. She continues, the anonymous account's impact is deep and far-reaching. Its content is amplified by high-profile media figures, politicians, and right-wing influencers. Its tweets reach millions, with influence spreading far beyond its more than 648,000 Twitter followers. Libs of TikTok has become an agenda setter in right-wing online discourse, and the content it surfaces shows a direct correlation with the recent push in legislation and rhetoric directly targeting the alphabet people community. Libs of TikTok is basically acting as a wire service for the broader right-wing media ecosystem, said Ari Drennan, Alphabet People Program Director for Media Matters, the progressive media watchdog group. Yeah, that's one way to describe them. It's been shaping public policy in a real way and affecting teachers' ability to feel safe in their classrooms. The account has been promoted by podcast host Joe Rogan. It's been featured in the New York Post, the Federalist, the Post Millennial, and a slew of other right-wing news sites. Meghan McCain has retweeted it. The online influencer Glenn Greenwald has amplified it to his 1.8 million Twitter followers while calling himself the account's godfather. Last Thursday, the woman behind the account appeared anonymously on Tucker Carlson show to complain about being temporarily suspended for violating Twitter's community guidelines. Fox News often creates news packages around the content that Libs of TikTok has surfaced. The role I've seen this account playing is finding new characters for right-wing propaganda, said Gillian Brandstetter, a media strategist for the ACLU. What does the ACLU care about right-wing propaganda? I thought the ACLU was supposed to be about civil rights, civil liberties. It's relying on the endless stream of content from TikTok and the internet to cast any individual trans person as a new villain in their story. Throughout its increasingly popular posts and despite numerous media appearances, the account has remained anonymous, but the identity of the operator of Libs of TikTok is traceable through a complex online history and reveals someone who has been plugged into right-wing discourse for 2 years and is now helping it. And then this woman is doxxed. And since everyone knows her name, there's no point in me not restating it. Chaya Reichik has been working as a real estate salesperson in Brooklyn when in early 2020 she created the account that would eventually become Libs of TikTok. And there's a history here of her on the internet under various handles. Oh, she started talking about traveling in D.C. to support Trump on January 6th at the Stop the Steal rally. Later that month, Reichik cycled through 2 more Twitter names, this time focusing on state politicians. Yes, and on April 19, 2021, she pivoted her account once again, this time to Libs of TikTok. Just 4 months after getting started, Libs of TikTok got a big break. Joe Rogan started promoting the account to the millions of listeners of his hit podcast. With his seal of approval, Reichik's following skyrocketed. Libs of TikTok gained more prominence throughout the end of last year, cementing its spot in the right-wing media outrage cycle. Its attacks on the Alphabet People community also escalated. By January, Reichik's page was leaning hard into groomer discourse, calling for any teacher who comes on as gay to their students to be fired on the spot. Her anti-trans tweets went especially viral. She called on her followers to contact schools that were allowing boys in the girls' bathrooms. This is put into scare quotes as if it's not happening, and pushed the false conspiracy theory that schools were installing litter boxes in bathrooms for children who identify in cats. How is that a conspiracy theory? Could be a falsehood. How is it a conspiracy theory? She also purported that adults who teach children about alphabet people identities are abusive, that being gender non-conforming or an ally to the alphabet people community is a mental illness, and referred to schools as government-run indoctrination camps for the alphabet people community. And let's see, alphabet people, and it just again and again and again. Now we learn that this woman who runs Libs of TikTok is an Orthodox Jew, which is particularly relevant, I suppose, to something or other. Strangely, we don't seem to know what Taylor Lawrence's religion is, if she has one. According to Vegan, we know that she is a vegan, which is always good to know. It's relevant, definitely. Taylor Lorenz was going around getting hold of Reichik's relatives and door stopping them. Yes, that's what they call it in journalists. Knock, knock, knock. Hi, I'm Taylor Lorenz from the Washington Post, and I'm preparing a hit piece on one of your relatives. Do you have anything to say? That is one of the reasons why people hate journalists. And so she has been plugging this story all day to her 292,000 Twitter followers. Oh, wow. She retweeted this from Kept Simple. It's getting to the point where you can't even incite a pogrom against queer teachers without someone revealing the name that appears in public documents related to the licensing of your personal brand. Ooh, this is what the left is obsessed with. A supposed pogrom against queer teachers. I suppose they'll be talking about queer teacher concentration camps soon enough. Oh, she retweeted something from another white knighter who is Ernie. Libs of TikTok creates targets in a violent culture war against alphabet people, some of whom have already been harassed out of their jobs. When Taylor Lorenz's critics make this conversation about doxing, they're failing to apply the same standard to right chick. Well, what do we know about Taylor Lorenz? We know that apparently she grew up rich in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, where she attended Greenwich High School and a Swiss boarding school. Ooh, classy. She attended college at the University of Colorado Boulder. Is that the best college she could get into? Later transferring to Hobart and William Smith College, where she graduated from a BA in political science. She has stated that social media site Tumblr, where she maintained a blog in her early 20s, caused her to become interested in internet culture. So we see her moving up the Daily Mail, the Hill, Business Insider, the Atlantic, the Daily Beast, the New York Times. A book deal 2 years ago with Simon & Schuster for a book called Extremely Online, Gen Z, The Rise of Influencers and the Creation of a New American Dream. And you notice that book titles just get longer and longer and longer. But not the bee.com has a rather amusing article about this, noting, I guess we all know this, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, Taylor Lorenz was interviewed on MSNBC, sitting next to a person, I'm assuming it's a person, sexuality unknown, and being egged on by MSNBC journo, and she bursts into tears. It's so isolating, and the host helpfully offers, and terrifying, and it's horrifying. Taylor Lorenz says, oh, phony, not a good crier. Christina Pusha had tweeted the Bezos Post Internet Hall Monitor is so excited to expose libs of TikTok. And she had previously expressed this year, in fact, I know you're joking, but doxing, stalking, trying to hurt and smear people's loved ones, threatening them, it's not okay in any situation. Of course, except when she does it. Glenn Greenwald, previously mentioned, had tweeted, Taylor Lorenz is about to expose the private citizen behind some anonymous account on Twitter, and when people criticize her for it, she and her friends will claim Taylor is the real victim, trademark, and anyone criticizing this type of journalism will be guilty of causing her trauma. Greenwald continued, one more time, you have the absolute right to criticize harshly the work of anyone who publishes articles in the West's most powerful newspapers, one owned by one of the world's richest men, and don't let anyone guilt you or manipulating you into believing that you don't. How dare people act towards me the same way that I act towards them? Revolver alerted us today to an earlier story, a story from last year. Meet NBC News' Brandy Zadrozny, the woman in charge of doxing and destroying Trump supporters. Brandy Zadrozny of NBC News is a key hatchet woman working on behalf of the oligarchs. She has a long history of targeting Trump supporters for doxing, censorship, and harassment. She poses as a neutral reporter, but like so many other journalists in 2020, she's simply an ideologically motivated hitman. Not only does Zadrozny brag about doxing Trump supporters, she actually wrote the book on it. Incidentally, there is one group of people Zadrozny does not support doxing: pedophiles. Allow us to explain. Zadrozny was a major contributor to the Verification Handbook, a book for online journalists. Specifically, Zadrozny wrote a guide on how to unethically dox anonymous people online. She appears to use paid, dark data search engines to dox the personal information of anonymous Trump supporters online, obtaining property records, phone information, and even their Amazon wish lists. Zadrozny is part of a press corps deployed to cover, quote, misinformation, disinformation, and extremism after the internet fueled President Donald Trump's win in 2016. This new journo beat was created to surveil, slander, and censor online voices that counter ruling class narratives. And there are some selections from this. And probably Darren Beatty asked, why did NBC News hire an obviously partisan hack to do the dirty work of George Soros-funded Media Matters? Trump will be defeated either through the impeachment or the ballot box in 2020. It turns out this disinformation expert, practitioner, not analyst, authored a how-to guide for doxing intensely personal digital data of anonymous Trump supporters online. This guide is marketed to fellow journos who flunked the same ethics class. I will remind listeners that a few months ago, the Freedom Convoy, there were millions of dollars in donations, and then mysteriously a list of the people who contributed to GoFundMe ended up in the hands of the CBC. How did that end up in the hands of the CBC? Well, the company was hacked. Now, who was hacking it? Could it be anyone associated with Canada's spy network, CSIS? Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. Using third-party vendors so expensive access depends on your newsroom's budget, Zadrozny tries to scrape phone and property records from your digital footprint. She touts access to your Amazon wish list, a gold mine for learning about what a person reads, wants, buys. You wouldn't want to be caught reading the wrong books, would you, comrade? Let's say you're a patriotic anonymous Twitter user. One day, POTUS retweets you. Wow, cool. But then Comrade Zadrozny from NBC says your account amplifies harmful narratives, so she sets out to dox you. This could happen to anyone. Indeed. And it really seems, well, it just doesn't seem, it is the case that journalism in North America now occupies the position once occupied by the Stasi in the DDR. That's what they see their job is destroying people who disagree with them. Of course, they have a direct pecuniary interest in this because increasingly people are not reading the regime media. But again, don't you find it curious that so many of these people now on the left are intensely just obsessed with homosexual and trans teachers and their noble struggle to, to tell 5-year-olds that, oh, you're a boy, are you? How do you know you're a boy? Oh, you're a girl. Do you? How do you know you're a girl? You see, what happens is that after you get born, a doctor takes a look at you down there and decides that you're a boy or you're a girl, and sometimes they're wrong about that. Did you know that? Would you like me to help you on your journey? These people should feel grateful that being mocked on Libs of TikTok is the worst thing that is happening to them. Not only does Zadrozny brag about doxing Trump supporters, she actually wrote the book on it. Incidentally, there's one group of people Zadrozny does not support doxing: pedophiles. I wonder why that would be. In 2018, Elan Malcolm drove to a house in Bristol, Connecticut, planning to rape a 14-year-old. Fortunately, there was no 14-year-old. Instead, Malcolm was catfished by the local group Pop Squad, short for Prey on Predators, which shamed him on camera shortly after Malcolm hanged himself. In a long article written shortly afterwards on a vigilante group that targeted sexual predators, Zadrozny complained at length about the suffering of pedophiles confronted by the Pop Squad. In an incredible segment of the article, she glamorized a tall and handsome alleged pederast who wholly subscribed to, wait for it, the American dream. Wow. Sounds like a great guy, right? Doxing Trump supporters, good. Exposing pedophiles, very, very bad. Oh, they're showing all their cards, aren't they? Showing all their cards. I don't think that this is going to work out too well for them. Let's go to a story, a related story from Fox 23 News. From Dateline Owasso, Oklahoma, a TikTok posted by now former Owasso 8th grade teacher is getting national attention for his pro-alphabet people stance. However, some parents are upset about his comments. The controversy comes as a proposed law limiting sex education in school moves through the Oklahoma Capitol. The now viral TikTok has been viewed more than 200,000 times. It's one that captured the attention of U.S. Senate candidate Jackson Lahmeyer, who called Tyler Rinn a predator in a social media post. That comment is not settling well with parents who support the former teacher. Here is what this person, who has, of course, asymmetrical hair and a sort of beard and several tattoos on his neck, because that's the sort of thing you're looking for in a middle school teacher. Quote, "If your parents don't accept you for who you are, F them. I'm your parents now." Oh, do you remember that conspiracy theory that the alphabet people were after your children? Doesn't seem like much of a conspiracy theory, does it? Or it certainly doesn't seem like misinformation or disinformation, does it? Speaking of women crying inappropriately, this is from Charlie Spearing at Breitbart. White House Press Secretary Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen, broke down in tears over anti-grooming laws in an interview with podcaster Jessica Yellen Tuesday. "I'm going to get emotional about this issue because it's horrible. This is an issue that makes me completely crazy," Psaki said when she was asked about laws passing in Republican states restricting schools on transgender issues and sexual identity and giving parents more control of their children's education. Psaki said the laws were cruel and did not represent the majority of Americans. Yeah, definitely the majority of Americans want your 5-year-olds to be told that maybe you're the wrong sex. Oh, and have you heard about this great thing called homosexuality? Because we're going to show you in graphic detail what it is, and maybe you want to try it out. It's like kids who are bullied, and all these leaders are taking steps to hurt them and hurt their lives and hurt their feelings. And then she burst into tears. The political games and harsh and cruel attempts at laws are laws that we're seeing in some states like Florida. This is not a reflection of a country moving to oppose alphabet people communities. Psaki has lined up a future job with cable news outlet MSNBC, as she is expected to leave the White House as soon as May. No conflict of interest there. No, not at all. The Guardian also picked up this story, and of course, the Guardian has a very different view about this. How many times can we have those initials in this story? There are, more quotations. What we're talking about here in Florida, for example, if you have a kid in a classroom and I have a kindergartner, I can imagine her saying, "My friend has 2 moms. My friend has 2 dads." And the teacher in a class might, I hope, would say, "That's wonderful. They're loving parents, and you have a mom and a dad." This is penalizing teachers and educators. There are so many layers of this that are outrageous. Yes, there are. And it's like the old joke about the onion. The more layers you pull on, the more it stinks. But this is what the left is all about now. It's all about cheering for the sexual mutilation of children. Because who could be against that? Eh? So I became aware today of a woman called Rachel Beitkofer. And she is described by Wikipedia as a 45-year-old political scientist. Oh, her Twitter account notes, "This Twitter account kills fascism." Wow, she's like the Woody Guthrie of Twitter. So brave, so very brave, this woman. And she is not happy about laws that are being passed in the United States. If you go to a Twitter account, oh, of course, there's the Ukrainian flag and the blue tick. Of course, of course, of course, of course. Oh, and there's a picture here of, and I'll have more on this subject later, children burning masks. And Rachel Bykofer is not happy about this. She calls it grooming. She calls the governor of Florida a Führer. That's a Hitler reference. Yeah, it just means leader, actually. And she has some things to say about sexuality. I know I'm not alone in the idea that I have to choose between doing the dirty with you or my career, health, and sanity. You're losing. I keep saying that every woman in those anti-choice states should refuse to have sex with a man until it's safe to do so. Right now, it's not. Contraception is legally available and inexpensive in all 50 states. Stonk Deuterino tweeted in response, "Your terms are acceptable." But she had a lot of support, including from some woman who characterized herself as a witch. Is that something that women do these days? And of course, since this woman is well known, Melissa St. Hilaire, great stripper name, who describes herself as a witch. Yes, also a medium and a poet and a gamer. Of course, she's a nerd. She's a nerd. And we get this golden oldie here. A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Remember that one? Oh, that was a good one. It's nice to know that these people on the left, like to stay current. So you can look up Rachel Bykofer. And she is a 45-year-old woman who is morbidly obese. She has 3 chins. No, sorry. There's not going to be much of a lineup for men to have sex with this woman. But as they say, chacun a son bêtise, right? Yes, everyone is interested in Rachel Bykofer's sexuality. No, they are not. But these women like to pretend that this is so. Do you think that they really believe it? Because I don't. I don't think so. I mean, women pay much more attention to this than men. But there comes a point for a lot of women and a lot of men too, where you notice that people of the opposite sex, you become invisible to them. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Gamion, who is first. Hello to Dan, Don from Beyond. Jokin666 says Gonzalo Lira thought killed by SBU. Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything about this because I guess there's no information about it. He was a Chilean American who was living in Kharkov, giving interviews about what the situation is like in the Ukraine. Not very happy with the Azov Brigade. Buddy says, Kevin, good evening from sunny but cool Midwest USA. Doubleheader tonight. Currently blasting the show to a new captive audience. It is cool here, too. And it has been unseasonably cool for weeks and weeks and weeks. Hello to Ann Run, a Dr. Deadname. Gloria Miller quotes Alvin Toffler. If you don't have a strategy, you're part of someone else's strategy. Buddy says Biden looks like he has a decent hairline from the front, but anywhere else it's bowling ball time. Did you see him seemingly terrified by a giant Easter bunny on Sunday? The story gets better because apparently he'd started babbling about the Ukraine, and the Easter bunny was actually a political operative whose job was to stop Joe Biden when he started talking about things like the Ukraine. Taylor is a silly first name for a woman, says Ann Run. It's akin to names like Madison and that habit. Do women still do this of choosing bog Irish surnames for their children as Christian names and thinking it sounds sophisticated? Sophisticated names. How about Queens of England? Kings and Queens of England. That's from 30 Rock. Jack at 30 Rock, but it's outstanding advice. A lot of Oscar Toe and Jim Smith. You think Taylor Swift may have brought acceptance to the name. Hello to buddy Daniel Maxwell. Just think of Taylor walking up to your door. Well, in the situation, I've already memorized a phrase. Not just her, but all of her ilk. I would sooner slice my tongue with a razor blade than speak to you. I didn't know Libs of TikTok Lady was in Brooklyn, says David the Gnome. Talk about living in Lib Ground Zero. Yes, indeed. Who else do we have here? Dr. Dead Name says tolerance was clearly a horrible mistake. David the Gnome says, I've literally had them bring up their concern for trans women of color and the violence they endure in modern America. Well, it is true that, Black trans women, they tend to have violent lives. One of the reasons being is that about half of them or more work as prostitutes, and their customers are often in for a nasty surprise, which results in the violence. Are you having, okay, who else do we have here? What else do we got? Hello to True Greenberg. Greenbird, one man's pogrom is another man's denazification. So Kevin is one of those Swiss boarding school snobs. He looks down on people who went to Swiss boarding schools. No, I don't have anything against people who went to Swiss boarding schools. Not in the slightest. But, people like Taylor Lorenz, they like to feel that they're, right with the beating heart of America, It's like Jen Psaki. This isn't what the majority of Americans would want. Well, how would you know? How would you know? All right. Do we have anyone new? Anron says, I'm beginning to picture Buddy blaring KMG as Albert Brooks blaring Streisand at the start of Defending Your Life. That is a very, very funny movie. A great line in it. One of his friends has bought a pickup truck, an all-terrain vehicle or something like this. And he asked him, what do you want this for? What do you want this vehicle for? Are you afraid of floods? And his friend says, yeah, well, if there's an 8-point earthquake here in LA, you're going to be begging for one of these. And Albert Brooks says, if there's an 8.0 earthquake, I'm going to be begging for a coffin. Hello to David Wright and Birkin Sultanov. True Greenbird says, we allowed them to legalize same-sex marriage. I don't think they have anything to worry about it from us. We don't have the will to actually oppose them. No, this woman, whatever her name was, she was saying, oh, yeah, next they're going to ban contraception. And no, they're not. What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. There is no movement to ban contraception. Again, I really think that women of this type, they find sexual pleasure in these Handmaid's Tales fantasies. They secretly wish that they would be subjected to this. Is this Yellen related to the Fed Yellen, says Anron? I do not know. Hello to John S. 7 Costanza. Hello, who says, I was in high school when the same-sex marriage debate was happening and defended it in a civics class debate. What a mistake that was. Okay. Will there ever be a Better Call Saul review? Is that back on the air? Oh, that was a Metropolitan joke, Kevin says. Anron Eigenman says that about public transportation to Taylor Nichols, a character. Well, let's just look up Better Call Saul. Of course, the star had a heart attack on the set, and that pushed back, I guess, what's going to be the final season, right? I bet, come on, Omaha, get to Omaha. Let's have the show in Omaha. So, season 6, 2022. Premiered April the 18th, which was yesterday. Well, thank you for reminding me of that. I will certainly get around to it. In the category Stop Trying to Make Fetch Happen, we have a column at the Daily Beast by someone called Lewis Staples. Girls at 10, in defense of Lena Dunham's creative genius. And I thought, what kind of man is going to publicly laud Lena Dunham and girls to the sky? Pinned tweet, I'm in The Guardian in print today, Lewis Staples writes, writing about queer joy and why the rebellious, disruptive kind is my favorite. Yeah. Can you people ever stop talking about your sexuality? Ever, ever, ever? No, they can't. Queer joy and rebellion is what it's all about. Oh, and here's a person of independent sexuality and race wearing a mask and holding a sign that says, wait for it, protect trans women of color. It's synchronicity, folks. As someone with a propensity for drama, Lewis Staples begins, what, really? You? No, never would have suspected. One of my favorite icebreaker questions is, who is your problematic fave? In a time when absolutely no one in the public eye is blemish-free, it's a revealing question. First off, it tells us what a person views as problematic, but also what they value and appreciate to such an extent that they're willing to overlook certain bad things about their fave. Everyone's boundaries are different. My problematic fave is Lena Dunham. I'm confessing this because Girls, the HBO show Dunham created, wrote, directed, and starred in, which followed a group of unlikable millennials in Brooklyn, celebrates its 10th birthday, April the 15th. Girls divided critics when it dropped in 2012. That's not how I remember the reviews. Lena Dunham was the voice of a generation. I watched the first 2 seasons of it, and I was shocked to the extent that how little effort was made to distinguish the character that Lena Dunham plays with Lena Dunham is herself. And Lena Dunham is a disgusting person who is, it's watching that show was like the annals of someone's nervous breakdown. Was the show problematic? Ooh, yes, indeed. Oh, and they talk about Donald Glover. Oh, and people were very upset that briefly Lena Dunham has a black Republican boyfriend. You know, the show made me laugh out loud so many times. Oh, Lena Dunham has a black boyfriend played by Donald Glover, and he wears a sports jacket and horn-rimmed glasses, and he's a conservative. And I was thinking, any black man who looked like that could have his pick of white women, but for some reason he picked Lena Dunham, which is not going to happen ever. I see Dunham has blurred these lines herself too. Narcissistic writer Hannah is loosely based on her. No, it is exactly based on her. When I saw that tattoo, which to the whole of her, one of her arms and then down her back, I thought, oh, I kind of like that. Just showing what a person this is, this so-called fictional character, that you would have such a hideous tattoo. And then I found out that this was Lena Dunham's tattoo. And stop being naked. Just stop being naked. All of the 3 other girls on this show, much more attractive than Lena Dunham. But no, we get to see Lena Dunham naked. The self-obsessed Marnie Michaels, Allison Williams, is modeled after Dunham's in real-life best friend Audrey Gelman, founder of The Wing. Damaged Free Spirit, Jessa Johansson, is also inspired by young Jemima Kirk, the actor who plays her. Like their characters, Dunham and Kirk are childhood friends, so it feels close to reality. Side note, nepotism is another allegation often leveled at the show, since its 4 leaders are all the children or famous artists or media figures. Yes, indeed. This is, of course, it's a fantasy. And the fantasy is that someone who looks like Lena Dunham and who acts like Lena Dunham is just going to have this wild sex life, and men, like handsome men like the actor Patrick Wilson, are going to want to have sex with her. And no, 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 no. But, I watched it because I was told that it was the voice of a generation, well, a benighted generation then. So, this is a fascinating article from Armin Rosen at the Tablet or tabletmag.com. British filmmaker Christopher Morris explains the FBI. His political comedies raise a disquieting point. Maybe it's harder to find a real terrorist than it is to make up your own. I don't know that I would expect an article about Christopher Morris, or Chris Morris, as most people call him, in the Tablet Mag. But this is good stuff. He talks about the attack, the January's crisis at the Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, and who are these people who are committing these terrorist acts? Why does it seem like they're all known to the police? Consider the case of the pistol-toting, crack-brained Colleyville terrorist Malik Faisal Akram, who was on an MI5 terrorism watch list as a subject of interest and yet was somehow allowed to leave his native Great Britain and enter the United States, a notably security-conscious country across whose vast territory he was permitted to freely travel. Yes, and there's some mysterious phone calls that he made. Akram traveled long distances and obtained an illegal firearm in a country in which he was not a citizen as part of an amateurish and scatterbrained attempt to free Ifia Siddiqui, an Al-Qaeda operative and Brandeis University PhD recipient held at a federal prison in Texas, thousands of miles from Akram's North England home. Curious. For those whose memory stretches all the way back to January, it is possible to remember that an FBI spokesperson's claim that the attack was not specifically related to the Jewish community came in for particular scorn. But what if the FBI flak was technically telling the truth? Maybe the plot didn't originate solely with the world's most ancient hatred. Is it so crazy to believe that the Bureau or one of its confidential sources had a hand in it too? There is nothing but loose circumstantial evidence tying the Colleyville siege to any level of U.S. law enforcement, but the evidence is always only circumstantial, and the truth comes out. A right-wing militant plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, one of the most politically salient of recent American terror cases, turned out to have been hatched by FBI agents and informants, which greatly complicates the Bureau's investigation of an incident that broke just weeks before the 2020 election. Of course, the most infamous of our recent FBI-concocted crises is the Russiagate fishing expedition, in which a cashiered British ex-spy based in London was used to front a series of ludicrous fever dream claims that originated partly in the Russian intelligence services in order to create a legal enough basis for surveilling an upstart American presidential campaign. In fact, Chris Steele was passing information to the FBI throughout 2016, and the Bureau even offered to pay him for his trouble. At the same time, Steele was getting paid with funds that came from Hillary Clinton's lawyer. If the FBI is that willing, even eager, to get mixed up in a hallucinatory and partisan conspiracy theory meant to impact the results of a presidential election, only to then foment the attempted kidnapping of the governor of Michigan not long after, it doesn't take much imagination to allow for the possibility that the same FBI might have also have inadvertently placed an armed terrorist inside an American synagogue. Especially when one considers the 2 decades of expertise that the Bureau has developed in entrapping particularly idiotic-seeming young Muslim men in harebrained terror schemes. Why does the FBI spend its time and resources playing these silly yet socially destructive games? Who knows? I'm not a spy, but perhaps spies have bills to pay, just as I do. And perhaps, as the English satirist and filmmaker Christopher Morris noted in a 2019 interview with Britain's Channel 4, the FBI have stumbled across the fact that it's harder to find a real terrorist than it is to make your own. Morris wrote and directed the greatest comedy film ever made about the FBI counter-terror entrapment, The Day Shall Come, a film so bleak and withering that barely anyone in America saw it. Perhaps in mid-2019, with Trump still in office and the fizzled Mueller report a bitter recent memory, the time simply wasn't right for a foreign independent film that made the FBI look like naked buffoons. Or maybe the movie, which is about a bureau agent who uses a fake ISIS sheikh to manipulate a harmless black nationalist into purchasing fake uranium from fake Nazis, was too dark and too tonally muddled to generate the word-of-mouth interest that a limited release needs in order to break through to a larger audience. On the other hand, 2010's Four Lions, Morris's previous film, is rightly considered a modern classic, and it's a comedy about a successful jihadist attack on the London Marathon. He describes Omar, the jihadi protagonist of Four Lions, as a Raskolnikov-like amoral idealist caught between his own inner evils and the possibility of some ultimately redemptive acceptance of the cosmic order. Four Lions, with its reassuringly distant English accents and setting, probe the comedic absurdity of believing you're ideologically obligated to commit mass murder. Chris Morris's big break into comedy was based on a simple and brilliant premise, namely that everything on TV could be treated as nonsense by virtue of it being on TV in the first place. On The Day Today, the groundbreaking news parody that a 32-year-old Morris co-produced with future Veep creator Armando Iannucci in 1994, Morris applied the inanity inherent in the language, context, and texture of TV news, a medium where the surrealism and the self-seriousness feed off one another. NATO dissolved when delegate swallows treaty, goes one typical and instantly memorable headline. Viewers got an in-depth report about a fist fight between then British Prime Minister John Major and the Queen, a fake event so convincing that it practically belongs to the historical record by now. As The Day Today's chief anchor, Morris played it all disorientingly straight, collapsing the remaining distance between real news and parody. The show reached an even more caustic and funnier level of critique through its repeated suggestions that, for reasons of laziness and entertainment value and the actual stupidity of the people in charge of news operations, much of what you see on a TV screen is basically being made up, including real-world events that are indisputably happening right in front of you. At one point, Morris's news anchor conjures an armed conflict by asking a series of leading questions during a routine interview with a couple of trade policy bureaucrats. When I first saw The Day Today as a senior in high school, I thought one recurring bit where Morris badgers the inept correspondent Peter O'Hanrahan was simply milking laughs out of a cartoonishly stupid character with a silly name. Now that I have a decade under my belt as a grown-up reporter, I understand these sketches, like the one where O'Hanrahan fails to reenact a conversation in German, thus proving he'd simply invented quotes from Germany's finance minister to be some of the most deadly accurate pieces of media criticism ever made. By the end of the 7-episode run of Brass Eye in 1997, an even more uproarious journey into television's takeover of what was once considered reality, Morris's on-screen career was mostly over. That Morris has worked almost exclusively behind the camera since the late 90s is an incalculable loss for comedy, given his gift for rapid-fire shifts in facial expression and his unmatched ability to deliver complex and bizarre punchlines with seemingly mortal seriousness. But Morris has always been picky about his projects, popping up to write and direct a scorching satire on the conceits of urban hipsters in 2005's Nathan Barley, or to assist Iannucci at various points during Veep's successful run. Yes, Chris Morris is outstanding, and I don't know that the fact that so much of what is on TV now is obviously fake, it doesn't seem to matter. That, oh yes, Russiagate or whatever you want to call it, and then Ukraine Gate, and then oh yes, that country in Europe, which you've never heard of until 5 minutes ago, is universally beloved and must be helped with billions of dollars of weapons and even troops on the ground, Western troops on the ground, because that was completely organic, what happened, and not at all completely made up. Well, Chris Morris understands the world that we live in better than almost anyone. Speaking of Groomergate, this is from local10.com. Governor Ron DeSantis' effort to redefine the divisions of power in Florida could be an opportunity for retaliatory action against Disney. A special legislative session held from Tuesday to Friday will allow state lawmakers to redraw Florida's congressional map, the electoral divisions, for the purpose of electing lawmakers. On the first day of the special session, DeSantis asked the Florida legislature to get rid of some independent special districts. This includes the special district that state lawmakers created more than 6 decades ago to help Walt Disney World Resort run efficiently in the Orlando area. Outstanding. Truly outstanding. It sounds like somebody or his staff is paying close attention to Viktor Orban and his praxis. So it's just a bunch of innocent people here, and they just love kids. They love, gay kids and lesbian kids and trans kids and gender liquid kids, right? I mean, how could anyone be angry at that? Love is love, right? This is a story by Libby Emmons from the Post Millennial. Professor David Finkelhor of the University of New Hampshire participated in a March 23rd talk discussing the elements of, quote, voluntary participation by juveniles involved in sex crimes, saying that when trying to prevent sex crimes against children, it's key to realize that in some cases, it is the children themselves that are initiating sexual activities with an adult. Finkelhor is the director of the Crimes Against Children Research Council at the University of New Hampshire. I'm not going to read any more quotations from this fellow because it's disgusting and it might rouse listeners to fury. But I only bring this up to mention that, yes, there are people out there and they've been working for decades to normalize pedophilia. Anran says, death to Team Rodent. Dr. Deadname says, seize state power, use it against your enemies, just like they do. The only thing that matters is winning. Yes, the friend-enemy distinction, as Carl Schmitt called it. Hello to the Salamander Penitent. NATO, EU, UN should be disbanded, says Salamander Penitent. Yes. Definitely. Scary story from Birkin Sultanov. Hello to William Hicks. Hello to John S. Says this movie sounds really good. Four Lions is, I suppose, this was a tricky film for Chris Morris to make, because Morris has been lamenting angrily, but also hilariously, moral crises, moral panics in the media. And so in these Four Lions, this is an actual terrorist cell. With the exception of one person, they're all idiots. But no, this is an actual terrorist cell because there are actual Muslim terrorists in Britain. TV depresses the hell out of me. I avoid it in the same way I avoid marijuana, says Salamander Penitent. Dr. Deadname says FBI hot on the case of the latest vaguely noose-shaped object. I always love to see these stories about Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, because I just in my mind I add a little sound bubble to her face. I'm melting. Someone needs to have a word with her about her makeup. Hello to Steve Harvey Oswald. Barry returns April 24th, says Pelcasso 88. Yes, very much looking forward to that. Of course, after the end of the second season, haven't they written themselves into a corner there? But I'm always impressed by the ability of people who do these kind of shows. Well, Alec Berg, to give one example, to get out of the corners that they have written themselves into. And hello to France. 2 new episodes were released yesterday. Ooh, 2. Hope all is well with you. Kevin, says John S. Well, thank you for your kind words. Anran points out a Metropolitan joke. Eigenman says that about public transportation to Taylor Nichols' character. I'm always rather surprised that Chris Eigenman didn't have a bigger career. I'm just going to ignore that. Do you get a lot of spam messages on your cell phone? I get a large number of spam messages on my cell phone, which is why I never answer a call if I don't know who it is that is calling. Now, of course, people who have reason to use a cell phone more than I do, I can see how this would be far more irritating to them than it would be for me. In the way we live now, this is by Mary Jacob at the New York Post. Cash me outside girl, bad baby, pays all cash for $6.1 million Florida mansion. She puts the cash in Cash Me Outside. Danielle Bregoli, now known as Bad Baby, with two superfluous H's, who launched to internet stardom 5 years ago when trying to fight Dr. Phil McGraw on his namesake talk show by uttering her famous words, "Cash me outside, how about that?" Wasn't it like that? As something else to add to her name property. The Florida native, whose television interview has since racked up some 14 million YouTube views and who has some 16 million Instagram followers, shelled out 6.1 million for a Boca Raton, Florida home in an all-cash deal. That's right. You can now cash her inside an ultra-luxurious 9,200 square feet home. The pictures that I'm looking at the strange lack of ornamentation in this house. A 7-bedroom, 7-bathroom spread with all the amenities. A modern 2020 completely redone estate. The property, located in a gated Palm Beach County community on an acre of land, features a 2-story guest house, hurricane impact windows, and porcelain tiles throughout. Perhaps it's the guest house that I'm looking at. And there is a enormous pool, 2 pools, and there's a bit of forced perspective going on here, but there's room for an awful lot of people on either around this pool. Yes, it is white inside, rather white and off-white, rather disturbingly so. Was this home, designed by robots? So this woman, this girl, 15-year-old girl who was out of control and clearly, a sexual time bomb, and she is exploited on a reality show. And so she becomes rich and famous and is covered with a lot of tattoos. Supposedly, she earned $1 million in her first 6 hours on OnlyFans. $6.1 million after taxes. There have been rumors about how she managed to acquire so much money. I won't go into them, but you can probably guess for yourself. I would think that if law enforcement had paid much attention to this woman, various men associated her would be in prison. But no. And the sad thing about this story is that clearly a great many young women who find out about this, well, that's obviously what I want to do. I mean, it doesn't seem to take much talent. Well, except, as Kubrick once put it in a movie, a little, natural talent. So let's go to Jim Kunstler's column from yesterday, which is called Thraldom and Its Uses. Having wrecked the latest business model, hypertrophic financial fakery, Western Civ stumbles into the blinding new reality that it takes real stuff to run an economy and that money itself is not an adequate replacement for the stuff. The trillions supposedly vested, for instance, in stock market valuations mostly represent mere wishes and promises. And for what? Why, for more money, which responds by losing value, so that we're racing ever faster toward a receding horizon. The net result, a world with less available stuff and plenty of money that's increasingly worthless in pursuit of stuff. It isn't long before people recognize the disutility of both conditions. The idea that we can fix this problem with central bank digital money is hilarious. When faced with less available stuff, resorting to money, ever more extracted from any relation to stuff, only puts you in thrall to more empty wishes and promises, when this is exactly the moment to be less in thrall and more in touch. The reality is that centralized government, such as the one in Washington, D.C., is less and less in control of anything, except the manufactured pretense that it can fix the problems of less stuff and decaying money. The federal government is increasingly impotent, unable to discharge its basic obligations to preserve public order and safety. Its previous attempt to fix something was the response to COVID-19, which has culminated in the fiasco of the mRNA vaccines, now pending and tending towards, and I can't repeat this. We are lately enthralled to the melodrama in Ukraine, largely engineered by figures and forces in our own government, and for their own ends, which look suspiciously at odds with the nation's actual interests, the nation being us, its people. Perhaps this illustrates the widening gulf between the slouching beast government has become and the people trying to operate their lives and destinies under it. No food for you, no fertilizers for future food for you, no spare parts for you, no free speech for you, no social or economic role for you, no health for you, and watch it now, soon no life for you. Collectively going crazy has been a luxury we can't afford anymore. You fell for Russiagate and it kept you in thrall for 3 years. You fell for the Adam Schiff orchestrated Ukraine phone call impeachment gambit. You fell for the COVID scare and the dangerously You fell for the fraud-drenched election of the empty vessel known as Joe Biden. Don't fall for the invitation to World War III. Russia means business in its historic sphere of influence. It's none of our business, and we're only making it worse for the Ukrainian people by pretending it's our business with the false promise of our support. The only thing that matters to us about Ukraine just now is that we're standing in the way of useful negotiations to end the conflict there and egging on various other countries in Europe to aggravate the situation. Kunstler concludes, it's been a fine distraction from everything else that is slipping away in our own country, including the loss of liberty, the right to a livelihood, the need for legitimate meaning, the value of our money, our respect for the law, the ability to speak our minds, and our duties and obligations to each other. Our government is not interested in supporting any of that, and we might doubt that it even could anymore if it wanted to. It only wants to keep you in a state of abject thrall while it fritters away our posterity. And I am now going to talk about Beethoven. Yeah. Why not talk about Beethoven? I haven't talked about Beethoven in this space for a while. Beethoven was white. Did you know that? And he benefited from colonialism somehow. Never mind the details. It's not important. He lived at a time where there was colonialism, so he's benefited thereby, which makes him a bad person. I'm reminded of easy Jeopardy questions. Subject opera or classical music. This Beethoven opera, he only wrote the one. I've actually seen that question. Almost as bad as this Bizet opera. Well, you mean Carmen, right? Because no one is going to say the Pearl Fishers. But Beethoven's opera Fidelio, of course, is about liberty triumphing over tyranny. And we have our own version of that now. Heather McDonald writes in the City Journal, for decades, opera directors in Europe and the United States have felt licensed to revise operas to conform to their political agendas. They do so through wildly incongruous stagings that update the action to modern times and introduce progressive totems that would have been unfathomable to the opera's original creators. Such directorial interventions left the libretto intact, however. Now, even that cordon sanitaire between the structure of a work and an interpreter's political preferences has been breached. Beethoven has been a particular target for textual revision. In February, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City hosted a production of Fidelio, an Enlightenment paean to freedom and to marital love. In Beethoven's version of the opera, a wife disguises herself as a male prison guard to free her husband from a Spanish fortress. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Fidelio became a Black Lives Matter critique of mass incarceration. A BLM activist is writing a doctoral dissertation on the 13th Amendment and investigating corrupt, quote, fascists in the criminal justice system. In retaliation, racist cops shoot him, and a racist warden of a supermax prison throws him into solitary confinement. The activist's wife, unable to persuade any lawyers to take up her husband's case pro bono, goes undercover as a female correction officer in her husband's prison. This change from a male to female disguise allows for a pleasingly homoerotic revision to the plot. In the original opera, a prison guard's daughter falls in love with a new male employee, echoing Lady Olivia's fruitless infatuation for the disguised Viola in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. In the Met Museum's Fidelio, produced by Heartbeat Opera, the prison guard's daughter is a lesbian. Her black father encourages his daughter to court the new black female assistant. Of all the production's revisions, this paternal matchmaking is the most counterfactual, given black working class attitudes toward homosexuality. In the current political and artistic environment, Fidelio was a Black Lives Matter manifesto waiting to happen. What made the Met Museum's production noteworthy was that the revision did not occur exclusively through the staging. Heartbeat Opera rewrote the spoken dialogue as well. The activist wife complains that the real conspiracy was not the one for which her husband was detained, but rather the suppression of immigrants and people of color in the U.S. The Supermax prison contains people whose only mistake was being poor and black. That's why you get sent to a Supermax prison, supposedly, for committing really stupid crimes. No, that's not how you end up in a Supermax prison. And what are the people responsible for this? Do they know what a Supermax prison is? Or do they think that it just sounds like really cool and like something from a Michael Bay movie? The imprisoned activist rails against his black jailer. You are complicit in a corrupt system that oppresses our people. I see in you a field Negro. The white prison warden reveals the depths of his racism by announcing that if the activist really wanted to help his community, he would tell them to stop burning down their neighborhoods and to pull up their bootstraps. Such a personal invocation of personal responsibility is, in the revisionist mind, a surefire sign of white supremacy. None of these lines is related to the original libretto. Oh, and what is this coupled with? Oh, the Eric H. Holder Jr. Initiative for Civil and Political Rights at Columbia University sponsored a discussion. Yes, and these discussions are now de rigueur. It says Tom Wolfe wrote about art some decades ago that without the theory, there's no art. Heartbeat Opera did preserve one aspect of the original Fidelio. The arias and ensembles were, by and large, textually intact. On April the 7th, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, led by Marin Alsop, will take textual intervention one step further. A poem by Baltimore-based rapper Wordsmith will replace Friedrich Schiller's Ode to Joy in a performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Wordsmith has explained his goals in the rewriting to use present-day social issues to highlight the need for positive reinforcement. That makes what positive reinforcement of what? Encouraging gender equality, cultural acceptance, and living a purpose-driven life are worldly topics. They're worldly topics I sought to shine a light on during the writing process. You're not a good writer. So, the original lines of Freude, schöner Güterfunken, Tochter aus Elysium, wir betreten Feuertrunken, himmlischer dein Heiligtum, joy, bright spark of divinity, daughter of Elysium, drunk with fire we tread thy sanctuary. This is what we get. Live and love with open mind. Let our cultures intertwine. Dig down deep. Show what you're made of. Set the tone. It's time to shine. We must fight for equal rights and share some common courtesy. While pursuing all your dreams, spread your joy from sea to sea. This would be pitiful coming from a middle school student. Wordsmith intermixes self-help and progressive bromides, not always grammatically. Family, friends, share your opinion. Push for gender equality. Be yourself. Don't judge too quick. Receive one another with open arms. Oh, this is our chance to unite. Spread some genuine joy and charm. Wordsmith concludes his Ode to Joy with a leaden admonition, a Hallmark card version of a diversity training session. Positive vibes for an Ode to Joy. Rise, oh rise, be the voice of change. We must show more sympathy. Does anything rhyme or scam there? Heather McDonald notes that Leonard Bernstein got into a lot of trouble when he conducted Beethoven's Ninth in Berlin on Christmas Day 1999, when he changed the word Freude, joy, to Freiheit, freedom. But now the wholesale elimination of Schiller's ode, so integral to Beethoven's score, requires no justification at all. In fact, Wordsmith's replacement poem is just one of several commissioned by conductor Marin Alsop for what Alsop hoped would be an attention-getting tour of 6 continents with 10 renowned partner orchestras. Now, let's see. Where Wordsmith was clear, if tried, in London, the poem "O Human," nice title, by the British poet Anthony Anaxagorou, was slotted into the Schiller slot. Speak up, those who've held the tremble. Can you see us hurtling forward, tying bells to vows like skin? What? And we have another one from former U.S. poet laureate Tracy K. Smith for an abortive Carnegie Hall performance. Battered planet, home of billions, our long shadow stalks your face. All we've fractured, all we've stolen, all we've sought blind to your grace. The rewritings go beyond Beethoven. On November 5th, the Baltimore Symphony will perform Igor Stravinsky's The Soldier's Tale with another new text by Wordsmith. And it will retell the story, which is originally a soldier persuaded by the devil to exchange his modest but beloved possessions for a deceptive promise of wealth, into it will be done from the perspective of a Black American soldier during the Vietnam War. I have quoted from Heather McDonald's pieces about what's going on in classical music, and here's the problem. Black people don't like classical music very much. Well, that's their choice. Who cares? But apparently, Black people in the United States are not getting their rightful part of classical music, symphonies, operas, chamber music, or whatever. So how do you get Black people to come out to these things? You get a terrible rapper to ruin Beethoven. Does this mean that Black people are going to come out to these performances? No, it does not. But they're just going to go ahead and wreck it. They're going to wreck it all. But the good news is that there's plenty of beautiful recordings of classical music on opera, on CD and digital, and DVD and Blu-ray performances of these operas. Let them do their worst. They can't wreck something that they never made. And in somewhat related news, I suppose Steve Saylor must have been quite pleased to see this story. This is from Janon Fisher at the Daily Mail. Black Lives Matter is blamed for 32% spike in murders of African Americans in wake of George Floyd's killing, as experts claim protests scared off cops and worsened crime spiral. The murder rate for African Americans jumped 32% after the beginning of the pandemic. The murder rate for whites increased 21% from 2019 to 2020. Well, yes. Is anyone surprised by this? Saylor notes he had apparently just recently the number of Black people in the United States killed in car accidents has gone up by about a quarter. Really rather astonishing. And various hypotheses were trotted out. Perhaps it was because of COVID and the streets were emptier than they'd been, so people felt justified in driving like lunatics, or driving really high on marijuana. Steve Saylor wrote 4 days ago, traffic stops are bad because they discourage Black criminals from carrying guns, driving badly, and dealing drugs. From the New York Times, chiefs, prosecutors, and lawmakers are rethinking the value and the harm of minor traffic stops like the one that ended in a man's death in Grand Rapids. Yes, I saw the footage. And this was a typical grossly stupid death. man, there's two black men in a car. The fellow who got killed, the driver, was from the Congo. He didn't seem to understand English. So he gets stopped by the cops because his license plate is wrong. He gets out of the car. The police officer tells him to get in the car. He does not want to get into the car. And license, can I see your license? Blank look. Can I see your license, your driver's license? Do you know what a driver's license is? And then he indicates that it's in the car. So then he gets in through the driver's seat and he's fumbling around, and maybe his friend is fumbling around, and he doesn't come up with one. And then he walks around to the other side of the car and tries to flee. And he gets knocked down by the cop, who gets into this wrestling match, a very strenuous wrestling match, whereupon the driver grabs a hold of his taser and won't let go. And despite being, ordered again and again to put your hands behind your back, let go of the taser, he won't. And he gets shot. He gets shot in the back of the head at point blank range. Where is this coming from? Well, as I've been saying for quite some time, the argument is made that the criminal justice system, the police, they are racist. Even if the policeman, even if the chief of police, even if judges involved are black or non-white, they are situationally racist, and there's nothing that can be done about this. So the justice system in toto is illegitimate. So therefore, there is no obligation for black people to obey the law. Not big laws, not small laws. And you can see where that's going. It's leading to many more dead people. A piece from the New York Post by DeRoy Murdoch. Democrats who claim white supremacy is top problem ignore black racist killers. Yes, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States, says the top domestic violent extremist threat comes from those who advocate for the superiority of the white race. Really? Are they shooting a lot of people to death on the streets? Are they shooting up malls, etc.? Street parties? No, not really. But we have this poison which is being dripped into the ears of black people by all sorts of people. A lot of people on television, a lot of people in the universities. Kendi, Ibrahim X. Kendi. A long essay by Victor David Hanson on this subject in American Greatness, Trickle-Down Racist Anti-Racism. This reactionary and neo-Confederate return to racial stigmatization and hatred is not going to end well. Well, it's already not ended well. And people like Joy Ann Reid, Don Lemon are too stupid to understand that the way they carry on leads to people being killed. It leads to white people being killed by black people, but it also leads to black people being killed by other black people. A privileged, stuffy elite, Eli Mistal, who I always laugh when I see him, he appears to be wearing a fright wig, wrote, I can more or less only deal with whiteness when I want to. White people haven't improved. I've just been able to limit my exposure to them. Barack Obama's official presidential portrait painter, Kehinde Wiley, described his black on white beheadings to the New York Times Magazine as it's sort of a play on the kill whitey thing. The Youngs and Mistals and their counterparts in all races are the rare foot soldiers. They act out the theories and rants of far more numerous, privileged, and elite racialists in a dysfunctional but symbiotic relationship. The former lap up and normalize elite hatred. Their even more privileged brethren assume the ensuing chaos of the street will be utilitarian in leveraging more of their own privilege from those of their own exclusive class. And give me a second here. Oh, yes, Ibrahim Kendi. He says the GOP are grooming children to be racist by banning critical race theory. Okay. Wow, we're going to be hearing a lot more of this word grooming. It's going to become multi-purpose, universal, ubiquitous, There's no escape. Steve Watson writes at Summit News. Google-owned YouTube has removed a recent interview Tucker Carlson produced with a woman who detransitioned from gender conversion, is now speaking out against the promotion of the ideology amongst young people. During the interview, Helena Kirshner described how she feels she was exploited at a time when she was young, confused, and uncomfortable in her own skin. Kirshner has said she felt sucked into gender ideology online at age 15 and was even encouraged by officials at her school to undergo masculinizing hormone therapy in a process she describes as very damaging. During the interview, Kirshner noted it's completely normal for not only young girls, but also young boys to feel uncomfortable with themselves, uncomfortable with their body. But we have this ideology that is especially prevalent online that says if you have those feelings, that means you're trans. So the video was taken down for violating YouTube's policy on spam, deceptive practices, and scams. That's a direct quotation. However, copies have popped up as well as versions on Rumble and other platforms. Quite obviously, there is nothing deceptive, spammy, or scam about the interview. It is one woman's opinion. But keep in mind, people, that YouTube and Google are the sole and exclusive arbiters of truth throughout the universe in perpetuity. And that's a good thing. Not just truth anymore, just opinions. So a 15-year-old girl decides she's going to turn herself into a boy. Years later, her body mutilated. She decides that this had been a mistake. And as far as is possible, moves in the other direction. And we can't have people saying like that because, well, it might indicate that the original decision, was a bad one. And that there is a whole structure that exists today to push this down the throats of children and to cancel anyone who counsels against it. In my country, you get sent to prison. You can be sent to prison for that now. So we must nip this in the bud. Let's return to Joseph Tainter's book, The Collapse of Complex Societies. A complex society must invest heavily in the development and maintenance of information channels. While it is not possible to show with available data that this yields a declining marginal product, it can be shown that it is an increasingly costly activity. Between 1940 and 1957, expenditures for radio and television services in the United States increased from 0.57 to 1% of GNP. Telephone operating revenues from 1880 to 1958 grew from 0.03 to 1.73% of GNP. The important point to note from these figures is that when a sphere such as information processing acquires an increasing share of a society's available resources, in this case GNP, the share available for other spheres must automatically decline. There is in complex societies a recurrent and seemingly inexorable trend towards declining marginal productivity in hierarchical specialization. So widespread is this trend that in democratic nations, entire political careers have been successfully based on rallying voters against it. C. Northcote Parkinson comes immediately to mind as the writer who has most effectively conjured the vision of bloated bureaucracies growing ever larger, devouring ever more of the produce of the taxpayers, and producing ever less of real value. And although much of his writing has a superficial tone, he has compiled some informative statistics to back up his view. Table 2 shows that between 1914 and 1967, the number of capital ships in the British Navy declined by 78.9%, the number of officers and enlisted men by 32.9%, and the number of dockyard workers by 33.7%. Yet during this period, the number of dockyard officials and clerks increased by 247%, and the number of admiralty officials by 769%. Between 1935 and 1954, the number of officials in the British Colonial Office increased by 447%. During the same period, of course, the empire administered by these officials shrank considerably. Parkinson has elsewhere suggested that beyond a certain point, increasing taxation begins to yield declining marginal returns. Two of the reasons for this are increased avoidance on the part of taxpayers, requiring still further bureaucracy to enforce compliance, and inflation, which reduces the value of the money collected. Beyond a rate of 20%, Parkinson suggests the marginal return on taxation declines. Such views, as is well known, figure prominently in current political and economic debates. And of course, this was written during the Reagan administration, when the views of Arthur Laffer became quite popular. Parkinson indicted bureaucratic self-serving to account for declining marginal returns on investment in hierarchical specialists. However comforting to some, this is far too simplistic an explanation. Mendick says compiled for private industry in several nations data similar to those Parkinson has uncovered in government. He was able to show that a pattern of increasing hierarchical specialization characterizes the private sector as strongly as Parkinson has demonstrated for the public. Clearly, in the private sector, where economic success depends on efficiency, this pattern cannot be attributed to self-serving inefficiency. The reason, well, I don't know about that. The reason why complex organizations must allocate ever larger portions of their personnel and other resources to administration is because, as discussed in Chapter 2, increased complexity requires greater quantities of information processing and greater integration of disparate parts. Even popular government products are subject to the law of diminishing returns. Mooring has shown that as the ratio of high-speed freeway capacity to street capacity increases, the marginal return on investment in freeway construction declines sharply. And I will have more from Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. And let's talk about COVID-19. Remember that? Remember when it was all anyone talked about? Well, Canada has put its foot down and decided that just because America does something, we're not going to do it too. Yeah, take that. So there. And this is in no way petty or spiteful. No. It's about something holy, really. This is Sarah Turnbull at CTV News. Canada's Transport Minister, Omar Alghabra, says masking guidelines while traveling still apply as the U.S. moves to drop its national mandate. Speaking in Calgary Tuesday, Alghabra said that while he won't comment directly on the U.S. court ruling that impacts plane, train, taxi, and other forms of travel, Canada continues to follow the science on masking. Here's another reporter who doesn't even bother to try and hide bias anymore. Follow the science. It would be the easiest thing to put that in inverted commas, because whether forcing people to wear masks on planes, trains, etc., is actually following the science, well, that's rather disputed, isn't it? Quote, the mask regulation is in place and it's based on the advice that we receive from our experts and doctors, and based on data. It is proven that masks prevent or reduce the transmission of COVID, he said. The minister noted that pandemic-related health measures are constantly being reassessed. There is no change in our regulation. Whenever the advice that we receive changes because circumstances change, we will change our regulation. But for now, it is what it is. Of course, its situation is different in the United States, and this has given Canadians opportunity to act smug and obnoxious. John Tierney writes in the City Journal, maskaholics. Wearing a mask may still give some people a sense of security, but they could breathe more easily if they'd face the facts. The pandemic has eased, but not the compulsion of many Americans to cover their faces. Fully vaccinated adults are still wearing masks on their solitary walks outdoors, and officials have been enforcing mask mandates on airline passengers and on some city dwellers and students. Maskaholics in the press are calling for permanent masking on trains, planes, and buses. High school students in Seattle staged a protest demanding that a mask mandate be reinstated, and psychologists now deal with the anxieties of children who don't want their classmates to see their faces. They're suffering from mask dependency, as this psychological affliction is termed in Japan, where a long tradition of mask wearing during the flu season has left some individuals afraid at any time to expose their faces in public. It's a difficult addiction to overcome, according to the Japanese therapists who specialize in treating it, but a simple remedy might help some maskaholics. It's a graph that should be required viewing for everyone still wearing a mask, and every public official or journalist who still insists that mask mandates control the spread. Yes, mask mandate states versus no mandate. The graph tracks the results of a natural experiment that occurred nationwide during the pandemic. 11 states never mandated masks, while the other 39 states enforced mandates. The mandates typically began early in the pandemic in 2020 and remained until at least the summer of 2021, with some extending into 2022. The black line on the graph shows the weekly rate of COVID cases in all the states with mask mandates that work, while the orange line shows the rate in all the states without mandates. As you can see from the line's similar trajectories, the mask mandates hardly controlled the virus. By the time the mandates were introduced in New York and other states in the spring of 2020, infections had already been declining in those states, and the mandates didn't prevent a surge later that year when cases rose and fell in nearly identical trajectories, regardless of the state's mask policies. If you add up all the numbers on those two lines, you find that mask mandates made zero difference. The cumulative rate of infection over the course of the pandemic was about 24% in the mandate states, as well as in the non-mandate states. Their cumulative rates of COVID mortality were virtually identical too. In fact, there were slightly more deaths per capita in the states with mask mandates. And drama queens. This has been a good week for drama queens, particularly with regard to masks and particularly regard to children. Because, oh my God, you take a child on a plane and you're risking the child's life, because the evil airlines have decided, nope, we are not going to force people to wear masks on planes. Brooke Tansley, who describes herself as storyteller-entrepreneur on Twitter, Broadway star turned film, TV, stage, NFT producer, and startup founder. NFT producer, non-fungible token, NYU. Okay. Apparently, she had a crushing experience on Delta Airlines. It's been quite a day. The judge and this Delta pilot have put people in danger. I'm very upset, and I hope the kids are okay. Thank you, Sarah Burris, for reporting this. Mom says her unvaccinated babies were flying in a Delta plane when it was announced mid-flight that people could take their masks off due to the court ruling that the mask mandate was illegal. I was on a plane with my two not yet eligible for vax kids. Oh, she can hardly wait. She's counting the days. And the pilot just announced that the mask mandate had just this minute ended. People clapped and took off their masks. Here we are, having boarded a plane with our kids, very upset, Delta, that this was announced mid-flight. It's the mid-flight change that is so upsetting. We now don't have the opportunity to look at the TSA change and make a travel choice that fits with our family's vaccination status and risk comfort level. We're in the air. Here we are, trapped in the sky. Yeah, that's what a plane experience is like. Trapped in the sky. It's the same for everyone at all times. With our 8-month unmasked baby, you can't actually mask a baby that young, although I bet she wishes she could. Under the supposition that everyone who can be masked would be masked, and the Flight 325 crew has taken our choices away from us. Very, very angry about this. And yes, she does go on. And I guess these people want to wear masks forever. And if they want to, sure, absolutely. Again, it sends a message. It's a very powerful signifier. Stay away from me. I'm dangerous. And yes, it's good that these people continue to wear masks. Not good that they are going to stick them on their children, because it is hurting their development and it is traumatizing them. Representative Thomas Massey tweeted the fact that 95% plus travelers took off their masks as soon as the mandate was invalidated should be a wake-up call to Democrats and Republicans who played along with them for the past 2 years. Let's take a look at, see if there's anything new at Eugippius's Substack. SARS-2 isn't doing much of anything right now, he writes. He produces a chart, which is from GripWeb, a project of the Robert Koch Institute, To track rates of acute respiratory infections in Germany, they based their numbers on volunteer surveys to provide data that are totally independent of the medical diagnostic apparatus. Right now, they estimate that 5.3% of everyone in Germany has some kind of respiratory infection. That sounds like a lot, but it's in line with pre-pandemic infection rates. More than that, you can see here what a complete nothing burger the entire Omicron wave has been. Despite all the screeching headlines, Germans spent the latest SARS-2 wave on balance healthier than in the pre-pandemic era. If it weren't for all the pointless quarantining, nobody would have noticed that anything was amiss. Now consider a second piece of influenza surveillance data, the numbers reported by the German National Reference Center. Participating clinics take respiratory samples from sick patients, and these samples are then tested for influenza, RSV, rhinovirus, human metapneumovirus, parainfluenza, SARS-2, and the other human coronaviruses. For most of the week since January, corona has been the single most common virus in the reference center samples. Despite adding this totally new pathogen to our small repertoire of pervasive respiratory viruses, however, the overall rates of respiratory illness remained in line with that from prior years. We may have an extra virus, but we don't have more sick people. Many have reacted to this towering edifice of nothing by talking about corona in the future tense. The Lauterbachs of the world cast their gaze to the fall in grim hopes of new killer variants that will revive the panic that brought them to prominence. A parallel tendency has emerged in dissident circles, where some have begun issuing their own dire predictions for the future, especially as to the fate of the vaccinated. Well, yes, of course, I'm very interested to see how that turns out. Because if the rates of hospitalization and the rates of deaths are no better for those who have got the mRNA experimental technology, that doesn't take into account contraindications. So when you add the similarity and efficacy to, of course, wildly different numbers on contraindications, I believe that some conclusions can be drawn. But one of the things that really struck me with great force over the last 2+ years is that very few people seem to understand numbers. What, any number over 1,000 or perhaps even 100, it ties them into knots. It bemuses them. It knocks them for a loop. Someone called Eric Topol, self-described on Twitter as physician, scientist, author, editor, he wrote this: COVID shouldn't even be in the top 10 causes of death in the US if we consistently used all the tools available. Yet we're still now losing the lives of 500 Americans each day. To which I responded, about 3 million people die in the United States every year. There are 365 days in a year. Do you know how to use a calculator? 500 deaths sounds a lot. In certain circumstances, it would be a lot. You know, in a small town, a village, I mean, it would be devastating. If you're talking about 500 deaths a day in a big city, you know, is that really such a big number? If you're talking about a country of what, 340 roughly million people, well, no, it isn't, because, you know, everybody dies. The idea that everybody dies, which I rather foolishly believe that everyone understood this, it's clear now that they don't. It just people dying. It seems outrageous now. Let's look at Alex Berenson. What's 2 times 0? Moderna says its new COVID mRNA booster makes twice the Omicron antibodies. That think days of extra production. Yay! Also, what's with the post-booster death Moderna went out of its way not to mention? This morning, Moderna spun results from a 900-person trial testing its variant-specific COVID booster jab as a big positive. The usual media outlets that have failed to ask a single tough question about mRNA shots in 18 months agreed. But reading the trial findings, as opposed to Moderna's press release about them, offers a very different picture. The trial makes clear that tinkering with booster design does not change the core problem with the mRNA shots, which is that the antibodies the jabs produce do not last. Worse, page 49 of the 53 report reveals one person in the trial died after receiving a booster dose. Moderna did not discuss the death or offer any details about it anywhere else in the report or anywhere in its press release this morning about the trial. In fact, earlier in the report, Moderna incorrectly said there were no fatal events in the trial. Well, no fatal events except for the death that occurred after someone received a 50 microgram booster dose, leading to what is described as a study discontinuation. Death makes testing for antibodies difficult. And another piece from Berenson, Pfizer to Poland. You agreed to buy our vaccines last year. You were begging for them. A deal's a deal. The fact that they don't work is irrelevant. It's sovereign nation versus all-powerful drug company. This should be fun. If the Poles win, count on the rest of the world abandoning mRNA deals as quickly as the airlines dumped mask mandates. Pfizer probably has the leverage, though. Many never before used biotechnology in haste repent at leisure. And let's take a look at Daily Skeptic. And the rise and fall of general practitioners. Eco-protesters partied at all-night rave to celebrate bringing travel misery to millions. Hundreds of Extinction Rebellion activists, including its radical founder Roger Hallam and his girlfriend, partied at an all-night rave on Easter Sunday to celebrate bringing travel chaos to millions of commuters. They sound like a bunch of fun people, don't they? And federal judge, yes, we know about the mask mandates. And we know about, we've seen enough studies. We've seen enough studies on masks. But again, this is the argument from authority. Right at the beginning, we told you not to bother with masks. Now we are telling you to. Well, what changed? What changed is that we decided that something needed to be done. So now you're going to do this, or there will be penalties. Nick Sturgeon told off by Police Scotland for not wearing masks. Will she now do the decent thing and resign? It turns out that wearing a mask is so unpleasant that you find these people like Nicholas Sturgeon and so many others, mask, you got to mask up. No, I'm not doing this, okay? I don't care what, it's happened subconsciously. I don't care what happens. I just got to get this thing off my face. NHS calls for volunteer ambulance drivers. Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and James Bond not on BBC's Platinum Jubilee reading list. Any particular reason why? They're written by white people. I think that's fairly obvious. The Metropolitan Office changed global temperature record to add 14% to recent warming, says climate specialist. Yes, as I like to say, bogus models being fueled by bogus data. Let's take a look at antiwar.com. U.S. to start training Ukrainians on howitzers. Senator Chris Coons signals he favors sending troops to Ukraine. Russian ambassador to U.S. says Biden officials won't speak with him. Treasury Secretary to press nations to ramp up sanctions on Russia. Canada has issued sanctions against Vladimir Putin's daughters. Perhaps, you can go 7 generations down. Perhaps we'll be sanctioning the children of Putin into the next century and beyond. Excuse me. Military used cluster munitions. And, oh, yes, a particularly insolent piece in the Toronto Star yesterday by Alexei Minikov. Why sanctions on Russia can't be lifted even in the event of a truce. If sanctions are eased, Russia will have the strength to lick its wounds and attack Ukraine later. So who is Alexei Minikov? Well, he's described by the Toronto Star as a political communications expert from Ukraine. He's a columnist for leading Ukrainian online media, including Radio Liberty. I thought that was the U.S. government propaganda outlet. Ukrainska Pravda, NV, and Liga.net. Since 2019, he has worked as a communications manager at the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. In addition, he has worked as a chief consultant of the Political System Development Department at the National Institute for Strategic Studies. So he's a government hack or deep state operative. But I just love the way that this ends. The lifting of sanctions must only occur when Russia not only ends the war, but also returns all the occupied territories, including Crimea and Donbass, to Ukraine and pays financial compensation for the destroyed infrastructure. It is a fair and clear condition. Of course, Putin launched his military operation not to return occupied territory to Ukraine. On the contrary, he sought to capture the entire country. In all likelihood, Putin will not make any concessions, so sanctions must remain. Moreover, the atrocities of the Russian military in Bucha, Mariupol, and other Ukrainian cities give world leaders a full mandate to tighten sanctions. Must. Well, as the Queen Elizabeth I once famously said to an important courtier, must is not a word to be addressed to princes. And why is this any of Canada's business? Why are we supposed to care about this? What is the Ukraine to us? Now I'm going to go to, let's talk about my own country for a little bit. There's a leadership contest for the Conservative Party of Canada, the opposition party. And it is ready, set, grovel to ethnic minorities because they're better than the rest of us. And the great replacement must happen soonest. Patrick Brown is the mayor of Brampton, Ontario, the former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, where he was ousted just before the election that brought Doug Ford to power. And I've never understood why this happened, and people aren't really saying. Every time I see his face, I think, has anyone checked his freezer for body parts? This is by Stephanie Taylor at the Canadian Press. If you show up, I win. Inside Patrick Brown's drive for conservative leadership. An apology to the Tamil community, improving cricket infrastructure, and putting a visa office in Kathmandu are just some of the promises Patrick Brown has made in hopes of becoming the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. But a search for these pledges on the campaign website and social media accounts of the Brampton mayor comes up empty. They appear only to exist in pitches Brown has delivered to leaders and members of the country's Tamil and Nepalese communities. He is courting them along with other immigrant and racialized Canadians to buy party memberships as the clock ticks down to June the 3rd deadline for leadership candidates to sign up new members. His main rival, Pierre Poilievre, is drawing crowds by the thousands. Meanwhile, Brown, a former MP and leader of Ontario's PCs, has been crisscrossing the country, making his case to rooms of sometimes as few as 20. A glimpse into his strategy can be found in videos shared on Facebook by those who attended such events, including a meeting Brown had with Muslim community members in British Columbia. 17 minutes of the event were live streamed April the 1st. In the existing Conservative membership, Pierre is more popular. The existing Conservative membership wants someone who is more hard right, says Brown. My path to victory is not winning the party membership. My path to victory is bringing new people in and having a decent level of support within the party. He says his team has a large campaign in the Sikh, Muslim, Tamil, and Chinese communities that have all felt mistreated by the party. After a brief pause, Brown says, if we pull this off, this is part of Canadian history. Among those he's targeting are Nepalese Canadians, just a massive, massive group. His campaign includes a coordinator dedicated to signing up at least 5,000 from the community. In a roughly 36-minute Facebook video shared April the 3rd, Brown tells a room of Nepalese Canadians in Mississauga, Ontario, that as a group, they have, quote, never played a significant role in a Conservative Party leadership, unquote. I wonder why that might be. He had previously said that any Tamil who wants to come to Canada gets to come here. Now he's sucking up to the Nepalese and the Sikhs, of course. See, Patrick Brown knows how these leadership campaigns are won in Canada. They're not won by talking about crypto and other, cringe ideas, or, vaping as Poilievre is doing, they're won by forming instant phantom armies of racial minorities, many of whom are not eligible to vote, voting illegally, voting from foreign countries, etc., etc., etc. It is grossly corrupt, but it's not done to make a fuss about that in my country. As far as I can see, Patrick Brown's campaign is to depopulate Asia and bring it all over here. And, oh yes, Pierre Poilievre. Oh, is he the second coming of Stephen Harper? I thought he was supposed to be the second coming of Donald Trump. But Michael Taube, or Tobe, who may be the most boring writer in Canada, he was a speechwriter for Stephen Harper at one point. And he, we shouldn't be talking about him like Stephen Harper because, Stephen Harper hasn't been prime minister for 7 years, and people have short memories these days. So, the left and people like Jean Charest, oh, yes, Stephen Harper, that bad man. Stephen Harper, but does anyone remember Stephen Harper? Obviously, it's not as bad as that. But no, I don't think Stephen Harper as the bogeyman is going to do much for them. Let's see what Michael Taube has to say. He has something very interesting to say about immigration, which not a campaign issue, because bringing in 500,000 new people every year in a country of 38 million, and doing this indefinitely, how could that be important in any way? The front runner, we don't know whether Pierre Poilievre is the front runner. Okay, but never mind. Also tackled the skyrocketing Canadian housing market. He shared a video last week of him standing next to a small older home in Vancouver that was recently valued at $4.8 million. Feast your eyes on the house of your dreams, he amusingly said, recognizing that it was a price point far beyond the hopes and aspirations of most Canadians. Poilievre continued by asking, why is it that Vancouver has the third most unaffordable housing market on planet Earth? He blamed two entities, Ottawa for printing over $400 billion in new cash, which is fair, and government gatekeepers who protect the wealthy with laws and bylaws that crush average consumers who simply want to buy a house. His solution is to, quote, remove the gatekeepers, stop blocking the poor, the working class, and immigrants from the dream of owning a home in this country. Immigrants, we have to have them buying houses. Where are all these people going to live? No one is asking this question. No one is asking this question. And if you think that, plus $4.8 million for a teardown in Vancouver is bad now, just wait. One of the reasons I left Vancouver for Victoria 21 years ago is because I was priced out of the market. Well, now the plan is apparently to turn Victoria, just like Vancouver, into Hong Kong. Well, everyone will be living in concrete boxes. But can't say anything against the immigrants because Poilievre, he understands too how leadership votes are won in this country by sucking up to immigrants and making promises to them, making promises that they will be treated better than the rest of us. Poilievre has already said that he will bully the provincial governments into, or bribe them as well, into fast-tracking acceptance of foreign qualifications. The provinces have resisted this for decades and decades and decades for obvious reasons. But nope, any immigrant who shows up here claiming to have a degree in whatever should be allowed to practice that profession here. And I think I'm going to take a final look at the chat here. And here we go. Let's go to the bottom here. Scroll up. Wait till Kombucha H gets in the White House, says Burton Solkinoff. Discovery Island and the Chatham Islands, says David the Gnome. I wonder if you could island hop with a paddleboard from Victoria Island to Washington State. Wonder why no one has built anything there. Because most of Canada is uninhabitable. I mentioned this last week on Twitter. I lived when I was a small boy for a couple of years in a place in Ontario called Sudbury. Actually, I lived in a town outside Sudbury, which literally had 2 roads on it. And people in Ontario are want to describe Sudbury as Northern Ontario. It's not really Northern Ontario. Ontario is a massive province in size, and Sudbury is a long, long way to the end of that province. Concrete boxes are good if fortified and you have enough munitions, says Don Willis. I found this answer. I wasn't looking for the answer to this question, but I found it a few years ago. Why is it that when you have, these earthquakes and tsunamis or whatever in places like Bangladesh, it seems like whole cities get wiped out? That's when I found out that in places like Bangladesh, they build concrete towers without using rebar. Oh, Don Willis says Susan Rice is your president. Do Canadians ever get really angry and hysterical? Asked Burke and Sultanov. Well, that happened twice in Vancouver history. Vancouver being known as a pretty laid-back place, when the Vancouver Canucks lost a hockey series. Yeah. Of course, the reason it happened the second time was that the police decided to sit on their hands. It was the 7th game, and it looked like the Canucks, which had a 3-1 lead, it looked like that they were flopping, and they fell behind in the 7th game. And what the police chief and the mayor should have done is to order every policeman to duty, because it was obvious that something ugly was going to happen. There had been the precedent against the New York Rangers, back in the 1990s. Don Cherry did nothing wrong. Bring back hockey night, says Don Willis. Okay. Who else do we have? Don Willis says he's just cashing checks, stacking cake, which would be fine if the fellow conservatives were not fighting for our freedom. Bring back Preston Manning, says Ogan's Iron. I met Preston Manning quite a few times, talked to him quite a number of times. Preston Manning was really good in small rooms. He was not good with lots of people. Just these boring, didactic speeches, which went on forever. And he was Preston Manning, obsessed with process. And so what is it that you want to do, Mr. Manning? And then 15 minutes later, I don't remember any of that. And what difference would it make? Okay. I think that's going to be it. I think that is going to be it. You mean, okay, yeah, traffic's low spark of high-heeled boys was forward-thinking nod to the future trans community, says Don Willis. I really love that song. I still like it a lot, but in the early 70s, the mid 70s, it was just the kind of really, gloom rock classic to appeal to an alienated 17-year-old boy. So that's it for today. I'll be back in the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. If you'd like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. And if you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interact at kevingrace at shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and a civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, managed to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.